The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Good morning and welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan. I'm Lindsay DeLucia and I'm here with Kelly Smith. We're going to be talking today about different types of things that are affecting our Great Lakes in our area. So welcome, Kelly. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first off, if you could just tell me your role, and I know you're a graduate student, so tell me a little bit about what you're studying.
Yeah, so I'm a graduate student at Michigan State University, and I was brought on to study crayfish in Michigan, in particular invasive crayfish. So some people might have been hearing about red swamp crayfish that are native to Louisiana, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard of rusty crayfish, which are from my home watershed down in southern Ohio. And I'm looking at mainly our red swamp crayfish in the state yet, because we've seen some body parts of them that we know anglers were using for fishing bait. And we're also looking to see how much rusty crayfish have spread throughout the state since the last comprehensive survey was done in 1975.
Mm-hmm. And so what do these crayfish do to the waters?
A couple different things. So rusty crayfish primarily live in the stream, where, you know, if you're ever a kid and caught crayfish growing up like I did, you know, it's the type of crayfish you catch with the little net and put them in a bucket as you go along. Red swamp crayfish are a little different. They spend some time in the stream, but they primarily burrow into the bank. So the effects that they have on the ecosystem are a little bit different. Rusty crayfish primarily outcompete our other native stream crayfish, but also can clip vegetation that is crucial to some of our sport fisheries, the young parts of their life. So they need those plants in the streams and lakes in order to hide from predators. They also feed pretty heavily on some game fish's eggs. The red swamp crayfish has several concerns. One, it would be competing with our native burrowing crayfish species, which are pretty crucial to wetland and wet fin areas. Kind of, you know, they dig lots of tunnels and things like that, so they do a lot in shaping those ecosystems. But Michigan, as you know, has a lot of dams, so the burrowing activity of red swamp crayfish can be pretty intensive sometimes, digging burrows 7-8 foot deep in some occasions. So if the population of red swamp crayfish were to boom in the state, it could potentially impact the infrastructure that we have built on rivers, such as our dams.
Right, so I was going to ask, and that kind of goes along with it, this question might be a little elementary, but why should we worry about it as human population?
A couple of reasons. One, Michigan's economy really depends a lot on both our commercial and our recreational fishermen, and if we start losing habitat for some of these fish, the men and women that go after fish are going to be less attracted to the state. Also, it costs a lot of money to maintain dams, especially dams that are still operational, like, you know, the one behind us here. So if red swamp crayfish were to get in, for example, and start to impact the banks there, it could potentially cost the state and taxpayers a lot of money.
Right. So let's take it back to the start of this. How do these invasive species get here?
There's a lot of different ways invasive species can get into any body of water. A lot of people probably heard of ballast water or bilge water being pumped out of freighters that come from all over the world. That's likely how zebra mussels and quagga mussels got here. The larvae, or even a couple live specimens, will be alive inside this water that is transported from somewhere else in the world, and when it's dumped in the Great Lakes, some of those species survive. Other ways include bait bucket dumps. So that's one way that we think that rusty crayfish got here, was back in the 40s and before. Fishermen from out of state would bring crayfish with them, and then when they were done using them, instead of killing them and putting them on the bank or throwing them away, they would just release them live back into the water. And that's one of our big concerns with red swamp crayfish, is that people might be buying them as food, or buying them in the pet trade, or using them in schools, or any way that they would get their hands on them, and instead of consuming them or disposing of them properly, they're just releasing them back into the water.
Mm-hmm. And so I know that you brought along some friends to show us today.
Yeah.
So if you want to show us what you brought along.
Yeah, so I'm actually helping out with a camp up in Presqu'île. It's a 4-H Great Lakes National Resource Camp, and they've been helping me collect data all week. We've been going around to different streams and lakes and trapping and dip netting for crayfish, and they've caught a lot of native crayfish species, but they also caught quite a few of these rusty crayfish here, so the invasive crayfish I was talking about earlier. And the big factor that tells me that this is a rusty crayfish instead of a native crayfish is there's this little rust-colored spot here, and I like to call it the magic spot, because if I hold them there, they can't get me with their claws.
Right.
But there's a couple different native crayfish species that look and behave really similarly to the rusty crayfish, but they lack that rust-colored spot there. And so that's, if you're a fisherman or fisherwoman, or even just, you know, somebody hanging out by a stream and you see crayfish like this, you know, it may be a good idea to, you know, spread the word and let people know they're there. And most of all, don't pick them up and use them for bait somewhere else. That's the big thing we're stressing. It's okay to use crayfish for bait. Let's stay away from using these and increasing their spread across the state.
Right, and speaking of, what are some things that we can do to prevent spreading invasive species in our water?
Yeah, one of the big things is, you know, aquariums are really popular, for example, and one of the invasive species we're concerned about here are snakeheads. It's a type of fish that's really aggressive. It's you know, top-tier predator in its home ecosystem, and it looks very similar to our native bowfin, but it's far more aggressive and can exploit a lot more resources. And it's fairly popular in the pet trade. So one of the things we ask is don't release your pets. You know, down in Florida, for example, you see this huge issue with the pythons and boa constrictors in the Everglades. So similar issue here. We don't want people releasing their pet crayfish, their pet fish, things like that. Whenever you are using bait, there's a potential that there are some non-native species that have snuck into your bait bucket one way or another, whether it be from the dealer you bought them from, and they may not even know that they have an invasive species in their bait shop. Or if you're throwing cast nets out or seining for your own bait, just make sure you're disposing of that bait properly, so that, especially if you're moving water bodies, so that you don't spread it. Cleaning your boat's really important. We have a lot of very small invasive species throughout the state that you may not be able to see with the naked eye, like spiny water flea, for example, can be transported just on your fishing line if you're not careful. So make sure you're cleaning your boat, maybe bleaching it down if you plan on putting it into a different body of water in the same day, and just taking care that you're not spreading these things.
Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for all the information, Kelly. We really appreciate having you in the area, as you're not here very often. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And coming up next, we'll be talking with Stephanie Gondula, who will be telling us more about the things that we should be worrying about with our Great Lakes. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Insights into Northeast Michigan, everyone. I'm Lindsay DeLucia, and I'm here with Megan Goss. We're talking more about our Great Lakes and keeping a healthy ecosystem. So Megan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So if you could tell me first a little bit about your role in this area.
Okay, well, I'm a Huron Pines AmeriCorps member, and I serve directly with the Northeast Michigan Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative, which is a network of education and community partners. And our goal is to have students complete projects that have a benefit for the environment, but also their local community. And the overall goal is to help develop the next generation of environmental stewards. So our projects are very wide-ranging, but most of them have a focus on our watersheds and Great Lakes literacy.
Right, so tell me a little bit about some of these projects or what's going on, being worked on right now.
Okay, well, we have across Northeast Michigan a variety of schools that are participating in different fisheries in the classroom projects. So we have students raising lake trout in the classroom, and also lake sturgeon, and then Chinook salmon. And these projects allow students to raise a fish throughout the school year. They get to see the different life cycles of a fish. And then it also allows them to help our local ecosystems, because these fish are then released back into either Thunder Bay or into different rivers in our watershed.
Tell me a little bit about some of the harmful factors in the waters right now that, like you said, in their ecosystem in the water, you know, the fish might be suffering from some things.
Well, I mean, you always have concerns with like invasive species and different like chemical pollutants and things like that. With these students, though, it's more of a focus on like what are the habitat needs for successfully managing these fish. So they get to they monitor the water quality of the tanks in the classroom, and they also maintain a healthy food supply for the fish. And it allows them to see just how delicate the ecosystem really needs to be for the survival of the fish.
Absolutely. And so this also connects then with the idea of careers in the Great Lakes ecosystem. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, it does. So with all of these projects, the students get to meet different community partners. For instance, with the lake sturgeon in the classroom, they work with community partners from Sturgeon for Tomorrow and Michigan Department of Natural Resources. So it gives them a greater connection to potential careers in this area, and it allows them to see just how you can have a career in the environmental field as well.
And why do you think these careers are so important in keeping a balanced ecosystem in the waters?
They're really important because it is our best way to support. We need to support the environment and help prevent human degradation and the impacts that we can have on the environment. So having to take an active role is really great, and allowing students to see that is very powerful. But in addition to just these careers, showing them how they can have an impact and positively benefit their local ecosystem. And you don't necessarily have a career within natural resources or in the environment, but you can do stuff on your own independently. And it just gives them a greater connection to their Great Lakes.
So tell me a little bit about maybe going through the process of these projects in the classroom with the kids, maybe from like step one all the way to finish.
Okay. Well, for instance, with the Salmon in the Classroom project at the beginning of the school year from Michigan Department of Natural Resources, students receive different fish eggs, and then throughout the year, they get to see these fish grow, and at the end of the year, whenever they are fully grown, they are released back into our rivers, which allows students to see how these fish can also be indicators for the health of our rivers, because they need to have a certain kind of ecosystem for their survival. And they also get to have people come into the classroom and speak to them about the fish. So in addition to raising these fish, they get a connection to these experts that can give more high quality explanations, which is really great, and it allows students to really develop via hands-on activities. And it's not just open a book and read about a fish. You get to see the fish firsthand grow and the different life cycles that it can experience.
Right, and do they get to follow these fish that I mean, are they tagged or something? How does it work?
Not all the fish are tagged, but
Okay.
the lake sturgeon, they are tagged. So for subsequent years, the students, whenever they're, they can see what happens with their lake sturgeon
And
time.
what are some of the things that, I don't know if you've seen, but that they've seen or observed when they've done this?
Well, I'm very new to the initiative, so I started here at the beginning of January of
Okay.
this year. So I haven't seen or heard from the students follow up with the tagging, but I know that they're excited to have the potential to see where their old classroom pet was now out into its natural ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely putting it into its natural habitat. So what are some other maybe projects that you guys are doing?
All right. Well, for instance, at Bob Thompson's 5th grade class, the students, they raised lake trout in the classroom, and that program was facilitated by the DNR fisheries station here, and then also U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And there's a connection as well to Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary. So they got to reach out to a lot of different community partners through this project. They were able to raise lake trout in the classroom, and then they also built remote operated vehicles, and they designed a delivery system reusing a pop bottle, and used a 3D printer to design a way to release the lake trout fry out onto the artificial reef, which gives them a greater connect to the larger the reef restoration project here in Thunder Bay. So it allows students to develop technology while also learning about our fisheries and a native fish in the Great Lakes.
Yeah. So where can people learn more about these projects if they're interested?
Well, you can always visit our website, www.nemiglissy.org, NEMIGLSI.org. And you can also like us on Facebook, Northeast Michigan Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative.
Great. So issues out in the Great Lakes and everything that's done, we have the perfect resource right here in Thunder Bay to keep everything kind of on the right track.
Yes, it definitely is. Thunder Bay is a huge asset for allowing us to preserve and protect our Great Lakes and the amazing both maritime and natural resources that we have here.
Definitely. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Megan. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And coming up next, we'll be talking more about the microplastics in our Great Lakes that may be having a significant harm. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Insights, everyone. I'm here with Stephanie Gondula. Welcome, Stephanie.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be talking a little bit about the microplastics in our water and how that's affecting our Great Lakes. So, Stephanie, first tell me a little bit, what are microplastics?
What are microplastics? It's a great question. It's kind of a buzzword right now. Everybody's saying microplastics are a big problem, and they really are. Microplastics are a type of marine debris. And so a lot of times when people think of marine debris, they think of just the oceans. I mean, we've all seen the images of the turtles with the plastic bags in their mouths, and the ducks with the circular pop plastic things around them and choking them. Those are everywhere. But microplastics in the Great Lakes are also a type of marine debris, and you can't see them. And that's kind of the insidious problem about this issue. These microplastics, of course, microscopic. They're very, very tiny. And in fact, 85% of the pollution, of the plastic pollution that has been found in the Great Lakes is comprised of this microplastics. So you look out into the lake and you're like, oh, it's beautiful. There's no pollution out there. But actually under the waves there are a lot of microplastics.
Right, nothing you could see, but that's a staggering statistic. I mean, how does all of this get there into the lakes?
That's a great question. So there's a number of different sources of microplastics, both in the Great Lakes and in the oceans. It can come from pre-processed plastics. They start out, whether it becomes a bottle or whether it becomes a box for your plastic, or excuse me, a box for your lettuce. All of it starts out as these little plastic pellets. And so that's one source of these microplastics. Another source is polyethylene beads that are in a lot of consumer products. They're in your soaps, they're in your lotions, they're in your toothpaste, they're in facial scrub, of course. And so that's another source. And then another source, a really large source of microplastics, are plastics that have broken down. So those big plastic items that you see, the plastic bags, the plastic bottles, that wear down after years and years of being in the water supply. So they just wear down and finally break down into microplastics. The whole key to this is they never go away. There is no throwing something away. There is no away. I mean, the plastics will always be there. So they get into the water supply in those ways, and that is what, the problem doesn't really just end there, because they're not just plastics floating around there and you know, simply there. They also are a sponge of sorts for pollutants. So PCBs and other pollutants are drawn to these microplastics, and then the fish eat them, and then we eat the fish.
So it affects not only the fish, but it affects us in the long run.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
yeah, what else do they do in the water? I mean, you said they attract pollutants.
Right. So they attract pollutants. They also are a part of affecting the ecosystem in terrible ways. It can affect the food chains of animals, and that has a very domino negative effect. It can litter the beaches, so it can affect tourism. So these, and you know, it's important, I think, to point out also that even though, you know, we feel removed from the oceans here in the center of the Great Lakes, we really it's just one big water system. So the pollution that does end up in the oceans is very connected to the Great Lakes. It's one big system, so it's an important problem for all of us on the planet.
Of course. And what research or what has been done about this?
Yeah, so there has been recently, not until recently, but there has been a number of projects. In 2012, a group of Great Lakes research scientists went aboard the tall ship Niagara, so big historic sailing vessel, and they conducted a research on Lake Erie, Lake Superior, and Lake Huron. And the way they do this research is they put out what they call a trawl. So it's just like a net that they drag behind the vessel, and that collects the water samples. And then on board, often, the scientists will go through and analyze those water samples, and then they can get a good count of how much pollutants are in the water. So 2012, there was a big study done. There's also been an interesting project with a group of high school students. Melissa Smith is a chemistry teacher at Alpena High School, and she was inspired by this research going on and learning a lot about the microplastics. Thought it would be a great project for her students. So the past 2 years, what her students have done is go out on the Lady Michigan, the glass bottom boat, and conducted their own sampling of Lake Huron, right here in Thunder Bay. And so they go out and they trawl for plastics. They come back, they examine what they've collected, and they're coming up with the same levels of pollutants, the same levels of microplastics. And then just this year in 2015, the Nancy K, which is a retrofitted fishing trawler built in 1951, and it's been retrofitted to be very focused in conducting plastic pollution research right here in Thunder Bay. And so students go out on that boat, not just the high school students, but any group of students can go out, conduct research. In fact, the owner of the vessel, David Brooks, he has invited local scientists, regional scientists, other groups to come out and take part in this pretty unique way to examine our water system for pollutants.
And not all of us are researchers, not all of us have this access to these boats, so what can we do? I mean, like you said, the microplastics are in a lot of things that we use as consumers.
Yeah, that's very true. And it does seem a little bit overwhelming. I mean, what can you do? I don't even know, really. I can't even envision what a microplastic is. So what can I do? And there's some pretty simple answers to that. I think being very conscious of your consumer practices. So when you go to the store, you know, do you need to buy things in the big plastic packaging, or can you rethink and maybe bring your own bag for your lettuce and just throw the lettuce in your own bag? Even things like with our milk containers, you know, in the old days they used to just have the openings like this, and nowadays they have these things on there. So do you maybe pick a different product? Also, recycling, of course, is very important, and that might be one of the most important things, but it's not the only answer. You have to start with how you're using things. An important example of that is your, you know, usual typical plastic bottles. We can recycle this type of plastic here is number 1, they call it, but the lid is a number 5. And so you can recycle this way easier, way more resources to recycle this than there is to recycle this. Now, of course, I'm not, I don't have anything against Gatorade or milk, but just, you know, thinking about how you're purchasing items, and then also how you're taking care of it, and how you're disposing of it. And just talking about the lids, I have a collection here of plastics that was found on a beach in the Pacific. And the Pacific is a focus of plastics pollution research because of the way the ocean currents are. A lot of things swirl and end up in that area, so it's just a big mass of plastic pollution. And so this collection found on the beach, and you can see all the lids, and I think that's kind of interesting, thinking about, you know, the lids on those different drink bottles. So just, I think, number 1, being conscious of our consumer practices, and number 2, being conscious of how we dispose of them, recycle, and then number 3, staying informed. I mean, that's something I have to do all the time. There's always new ways to recycle, there's always new resources. And there's also movies and websites you can go to. There's a marine debris program within NOAA, which is the sanctuary system is a part of NOAA, and they have a great marine debris program with an office in the Great Lakes. So they've got a lot of great resources. And also we show movies here about plastics pollution. In fact, coming up on August 12th, there's going to be a free screening of a movie called Bag It that talks about, you know, looking just at the plastic bags, which are everywhere, and how we can do something about that issue.
Yeah, and to kind of wrap up, do you see anything in the near future or anything with businesses and products kind of changing the way that they package their things or something like that to get involved in this movement?
That is a great question. I'm glad you asked that, because it kind of throws some hope, I think, into this. And I do believe there's been a lot of positive changes from the individuals like you and I making better decisions, up to companies rethinking their packaging, up to companies even pulling products off the shelves that they now realize the effect on the environment that these products will have. So a lot of companies are pulling off their microbead cleansers, or replacing microbeads with more natural ingredients. What do you call it? Like nut shells are another good scrub that are natural and does not harm the environment. And then also there's been some positive legislation to limit plastics use. Also at the ground level with individual consumers, you know, so adding not a penalty, I guess, but a fee if you're going to use a plastic bag, and then legislation to limit in production. So from the consumer use up to the production use of really trying to get a handle on the production and the getting all this stuff out in the environment. We're starting to realize that there are ways that we can curb it.
Well, hopefully we see that in the near future. Thanks so much, Stephanie, for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's all we have for you this week on Insights into Northeast Michigan. Tune in next week for more. Thanks.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.